Can we just appreciate my, like, me standing, like, one of the best cartoons ever? Just saying. Okay, just saying. And I feel like that's a perfect segue into today's video because, I mean, is Teen Titans sci-fi? One is an alien, one is a mutant, and one is a cyborg. Like, that is sci-fi. Like, okay, yes, the other one is a demon, so maybe there's some fantasy. But still, Robin is so basic. Like, why is he the main one? It doesn't make any sense. Anyways, today is not about old Cartoon Network shows that ended before their time. Today is about science fiction. I'm here to announce Sci-Fi September, which is a month-long read-along that I created because I wanted to read more sci-fi. Sci-fi is a genre that I claim to love, but that I really don't read that much of. So I thought that this would be a fun and engaging opportunity to further acquaint myself with this vast and fascinating field of literature. But what fun would it be if I didn't invite anybody to participate along with me? I want as many people to participate in this read-along. Whether you read a lot of sci-fi or not, this could be a really good opportunity for you to get into and start exploring a genre that you're not so familiar with, or to keep reading like the sci-fi addicts that I know some of you are. The main objective is to read sci-fi. Whether you read only one sci-fi book or 100, we just want you to read as much science fiction during September as possible. Whatever is a lot of sci-fi for you, read it. I have 3 co-hosts who have agreed to join me along for this ride. So we first have my booktube grandama Kathy Tritat, my longtime booktube bestie Kelly from Bookstrips, formerly from The Rainbow Sky Child, and my booktube soulmate Jessie from Bowties and Books. So make sure to go over and subscribe to their channels because they will also be uploading announcement videos between today and tomorrow. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the fun challenges. We have a Twitter account at Sci-Fi September, so you should follow that for like instant updates. That will be linked down below, and I'm also thinking about making an Instagram, so I will link that down below eventually if I end up doing that. Kelly will also be hosting a Discord, as we know a lot of people like to use that app now. There'll be multiple channels on the Discord. We haven't really figured it out as yet, but we're thinking of doing like one for updates, one for challenges, and maybe different books, like certain popular books. We might have channels for those, so like you could read along with other people. We'll see how that goes, but a link to the Discord will of course be down below. That is if Kelly gets us the link in time. Finally, we will be hosting live reading sessions on our channels, except for Kelly's. It'll be something like Quarantined Pages, where we read silently for an hour, and then after we discuss what we've read. We will announce more information, like with the dates and times of the live shows and whose channels and whatnot later on, so make sure to follow the Twitter for more updates. I'll also be updating my community tab here, so you could keep up with that too if you're not on Twitter. So now on to the exciting part, which is the challenges. We have a bingo board, okay, of 16 challenges. So you could try to complete all 16, or you could just try to get a couple of bingos. If you want, you could double up, triple up, quadruple up on the challenges, whether you read one book that completes all 16, or whether you read 16 separate books to complete all 16. Like, it doesn't matter. It's totally up to you. You don't even have to pay attention to the bingo board, really. It's only just there to make the read along more fun and engaging. But you know, once you read sci-fi, you'll be completing the main goal of the read along. So let's go through the challenges together. The first one is an unpopular or unheard of book, which is self-explanatory. The second one is a classic or older book, and pretty much anything that was published before the 90s could count for this. The next prompt is a non-space book. So we created this one specifically with the intention of trying to influence you to read something that is other than an out-of-space, space opera, you know, interplanetary kind of sci-fi, because that tends to be the dominant subgenre within sci-fi, so we wanted to challenge you to read a little bit outside of that. Next up, read anything with time travel, which shouldn't be too hard. Read a book with fantasy elements, so this would be any sci-fi book that also has some kind of fantasy in it, kind of like what we were talking about with Teen Titans, with 3 of them being like sci-fi-ish characters and then the other one being kind of like a fantasy character. So you could have something like that, or you could have a book that's like a cross between sci-fi and fantasy. Think like maybe Mirage by Sumaya Dawood, which I haven't read, but which I assume is a cross between sci-fi and fantasy. I really hope it is, because that's one of the books I'm planning to read. The next challenge is to read something Global South. The Global South, if you didn't know, basically refers to countries that are not North America, Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. So basically, countries that are in the developing world, countries that are not white majority countries, those can all count as Global South. It's totally up for your interpretation. You could Google it and, you know, decide what that means for you. So you can read a book that is set in the Global South, but it doesn't have to be set in the Global South, because not every book is set in our world or in our reality, not every sci-fi book, right? So you could read something that is just from the perspective of an author who is from the Global South, or you could read something where the law and the systems and the aesthetics and the influence of the world is influenced by more of a global south aesthetic versus a more western global north aesthetic. So think maybe something like Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. The main purpose of this challenge is really just to encourage you to read outside of not just whiteness but of global northness, which is not a word, and westernness in general. I forgot a challenge. Read a book with a robot or AI presence. Next up, we want you to read a contemporary novel with science fiction elements. So this is any kind of book that exists pretty much in our world, but that has some sort of science fiction twist to it. So think Hank Green's books. You could also read something like Lindsay Ellis's recent book, Axiom's End, because those books take place in a world that is very much our world, where maybe an alien invasion happens, or maybe, you know, something happens that is in the realm of science fiction. That's not really something that could really happen in our reality. Speaking of Axiom's End, next up we want you to read a book with an alien presence. So any book that has any kind of extraterrestrial or alien. We want you to read a queer or LGBTI book. This could be any book, whether or not it's by a queer author, that features a queer main protagonist. It doesn't have to be focused on their identity, or it doesn't have to be about being queer. Once it's a science fiction novel with a queer main protagonist, you're good to go. Next up, we want you to do something with a non-human main protagonist. So pretty much anything with AI or robot or alien as the main character. Think maybe Ancillary Justice or The Humans by Matt Haig. Next up, we want you to read a short story or novella. So anything that's like less than 200, 150, 100 pages, read that. Something like, again, the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor would fit perfectly with this challenge. So just read a short story or a short work of science fiction. Next up is water, and this could be open to interpretation, but two main things come to mind when I think water and science fiction. I'm thinking something along the lines of like Light at the Bottom of the World by London Shah, or maybe 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where the science fiction story is set underwater. So kind of like, you know, submarines and domes, and people live in like waterproof buildings and that kind of stuff under the water, if that makes sense. I'm also thinking like climate fiction, like there's a lot of books, like I think there's this new book called The Highlands or something like that, and then there's this other book called New York 2140, which basically envision future realities where the earth is beginning to flood and people now have to like live in cities that have turned into something kind of like Venice. So New York 2140 actually follows a New York where all the streets have turned into water because the sea is actually reclaiming New York City. So we want you to read any kind of sci-fi novel that has anything to do with water or a body of water. It could even just have water on the cover, like, you know, again, totally up to you. That's your interpretation. Next up, we want you to read a popular or a hyped book. So anything that's super duper popular that you hear about a lot, that you yourself have been wanting to read, go for it. Steampunk. Okay, so anything that falls into the category of steampunk. I don't know how to describe the genre itself. It's kind of like historical science fiction based in, like, I guess, a kind of Victorian aesthetic with like clockworks and cogs and that kind of stuff. Just Google it and pick out any book that falls into the category of steampunk. Finally, we want you to read a book that was recommended to you. So any sci-fi novel that someone has recommended to you, or maybe you watched a booktube video where somebody recommended it. Any book that was recommended to you. The rain is about to fall, so I think it's an appropriate time for me to wrap up this video. Make sure to follow us on social media. Make sure to subscribe to all the other hosts. Thank you ever so much for watching this video. I'm so excited for Sci-Fi September. Let me know if you'll be participating. And until next time, inshallah, keep reading.